Now it's time to think and discern. This is Bob Burney Live.
Well, it is again my privilege to welcome you to Bob Burney Live. And it's also again my privilege to welcome to the program Jamie Goodlet with Confident Contender and Apologetics Ministry right here in Ohio. Jamie, how are you today?
I'm well, Bob. How about yourself?
I am blessed. Good to talk to you. Good to have you on the program. Everybody at your house and your family well?
Everyone is doing well. Thank you for asking.
Good. You've been on the program before, but for those that were not listening at that time, give us a little bit of an introduction to yourself. You had an unusual pathway to apologetics, shall we say. Give us a little bit about your background. Introduce yourself to our audience.
Sure. My name is Jamie Goodlet, and I live here in Columbus, Ohio, with my wife, Carissa, and my two kids, Camden and Abby. But I originally hail from Youngstown, Ohio. I was a fireman there for a good many years. I hurt myself in a fire and was prescribed prescription pain medication. And I became addicted to that and spent about 2 years in active addiction. It was primarily because of that I left the fire service, and in my recovery found kind of a new road, a new path, and God was leading me down this road. I became an associate pastor here in Columbus for Trinity Assembly of God on the city's west side, and then moved from that into this thing we call apologetics, which is basically just defending the Christian worldview with good reason and logic.
Well, that's wonderful, and God obviously is blessing your ministry greatly. Jamie, you know, the only thing we're seeing on the news is coronavirus, people dying and so forth. It's almost as if Easter has been completely forgotten this year. And I think that's incredibly sad. It's obvious that the overwhelming majority of local churches will not be having Easter services, which is usually the largest attendance day of the year, that and Christmas. So I would love for us to just shift our focus today to the reason behind Easter, and that is the resurrection of Christ. And I would love to ask you the question. We obviously have a very strong biblical presentation of the resurrection, the bodily resurrection of Christ, but can we really be certain? Is there really any evidence that Jesus Christ rose bodily, literally from the grave?
You know, that's a good question. C.S. Lewis said that Christianity, if false, is of no importance. If it's true, it's of infinite importance. But one thing it can't be is moderately important. And then the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians talked about that if Christ had not been raised, then our faith is worthless, that we are all men most to be pitied. And so as Christians, we're kind of in a unique spot in that our entire belief system rests entirely on a historical event. And I think this event can either be verified or falsified by looking at some of the evidence. And we do this in the same way that we look at any historical event, any event that happened in history. Historians gather different applicable information, and they use certain objective criterion to determine if we have good reason to believe if something's true and historical, if it's false, or if it's partly true. And so there are a good number of reasons why we believe that Jesus actually bodily rose from the dead. I mean, think of this. This is a crazy statement. It's an extraordinary statement that we have somebody coming back from the dead, not being resuscitated. I'm a paramedic, and so I've resuscitated a good number of people, quote, back from the dead, if you will, but they weren't really dead. Jesus was dead, in the tomb for 3 days, dead, like nearly smelling dead. And so that's the first thing that we have to emphasize, is that Jesus really did die. So there is what they call minimal fact case for the resurrection. This was developed by a guy named Gary Habermas from Liberty University. And basically what this argument is, it takes all the historical evidence that is strongly evidenced and granted by virtually all scholars on the subject. We're talking Christians and atheists alike. So even the skeptical scholars will give us these 7 bits of historical information. And I'll rattle those off real quick, and then if you'd like, we could kind of break those down as
Sure,
time
absolutely.
So the 7 are this, that the historical Jesus is real, not some Jesus somewhere else, but the Jesus of the Bible was a real historical figure. There isn't any historical scholar really in the world that would say that Jesus was a myth. Maybe 1 or 2, but we're talking the vast majority will grant that Jesus really was a historical person. Number 2, that Jesus died by Roman crucifixion during the reign of Pontius Pilate. Number 3, about 75% of historians will grant that the tomb was empty, that Jesus' tomb that he was laid in was empty. Number 4, that there were these post-mortem appearances, or that the disciples and other people really believed that they had this experience with a risen Jesus. Number 5, of the 7 that all scholars will grant, is that Saul of Tarsus made this amazing conversion. Most people want to go from rags to riches. He intentionally went from riches to rags and completely uprooted his life overnight and joined the cause of the people that he was persecuting. Number 6 is James, brother of Jesus. He thought Jesus was crazy. And then after the resurrection, when he had an encounter with his brother, he then became the lead pastor of the church. And then finally, number 7 is the fact that the early church exploded onto the scene, when in fact, if Jesus hadn't been raised, a dead Messiah equals a dead Messiah movement. It wouldn't have even got off the ground. So there we have the 7, what they call minimal facts. These are facts that nearly all historians, skeptical and not, will grant the Christian worldview.
I think all of those are very strong. But my wife and I were talking just last night about the fact of the apostles, Jeremy. If anybody knew for sure whether Jesus actually rose from the grave or it was some grand hoax, they knew. They were there. And why in the world, if it was a hoax, if it wasn't true, why would they not only risk their lives, they gave their lives. All but one died a horribly painful martyr's death, going to the grave proclaiming that the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ actually happened. How can these skeptics deny that?
Well, you know what? If you're a skeptic, you have to ask yourself, what motivation would the disciples have to make something like this up? There's only 3 reasons why any crime or any thing like this is committed. Only 3. They always be boiled down to these 3: sex, money, and power. And the disciples got a whole lot of nothing when it comes to those 3. Mm-hmm. They had nothing, absolutely nothing to gain and everything to lose. And, oftentimes I get people say, so what? People die for causes all the time. I mean, look at the terrorists on 9/11. They willingly died for their cause, so that's not saying much. And to that, I'd say that there's a huge difference, and the difference is this. The hijackers on 9/11, they were dying for what they believed to be true. I mean, you cannot doubt their sincerity. If you're going to die for what you believe, you can't doubt that sincerity. However, they weren't in a position to know for certain if it was true.
Yeah.
But the disciples were in a position to know if it was true, and they still went to their deaths. People don't go to their deaths for something they know to be a lie.
Yeah.
But they will go to their deaths for something they know to be true, and that's exactly what the disciples did.
We need to take a break. We're talking with Jamie Goodlet. His ministry is Confident Contender. If you want to learn more, go to confidentcontender.com. confidentcontender.com. Quick break. We'll be back with more with Jamie Goodlet. Again, welcome back to Bob Burney Live, and welcome to Jamie Goodlet with Confident Contender. Jamie, we're talking about the resurrection and the evidence for it. How do you respond to what's commonly called as the swoon theory, that Jesus didn't really die? He obviously was crucified. He lost a lot of blood, lost a lot of fluid, and he became comatose. He passed out on the cross. They took him down from the cross, put him in the tomb, and the cool, damp tomb revived him, and he never really died. How do you respond to that?
Well, if you believe that, I have a bridge I'd like to tell you. Let me give you quick 3 good reasons why nearly all scholars of antiquity grant that Jesus actually died on the cross. First and foremost, the Roman guards were the best, most experienced killing force on the planet. They were like the Navy SEALs of their day. And for them not to carry out a crucifixion and to bungle it that bad to allow someone to actually survive would have probably cost them their lives. So not only were their lives on the line had they not successfully carried out those orders, but they were the best killing force on the planet, and they were convinced Jesus was dead when they took him down. Another reason we know, the second reason, is because they did not break Jesus' legs. In crucifixion, in order to breathe, you have to push up off of your feet in order to catch your breath, and then you would kind of rest or relax on the cross. If you're unable to push up, then you suffocate and die. And we see that in the book of John. They talk about how the Roman guards broke the legs of the thieves on either side of Jesus because they were still alive. But they didn't break Jesus' legs. And that tells me that they really believed he was dead. But to top things all off, they're like, you know what? Better be safe than sorry. Hand me that spear.
Right.
One of the guards used the spear to puncture Jesus in the side. And John writes something remarkable here. He says that blood and water flowed, and what he couldn't have possibly known at the time is a medical condition. When we have these cavities that surround our heart, surround our lungs, pleural cavities, and they have a little bit of fluid in there so that our lungs and our heart can contract, expand, and things like that without friction. Well, that is a clear water-like substance. And so when they pierced Jesus' side, they either got both his lungs or his lungs and his heart. And in piercing that sac, the blood and that fluid in the pleural cavity flowed out of Jesus. Had he still been alive, you would have seen a gushing or a spurting kind of action with that blood. But what we saw was just a flow. So the Roman guards were the best trained. They didn't break Jesus' legs because they were convinced he was dead. But just to put the icing on the cake, they decided, let's go ahead and shove this spear in his side. And so those are the 3 good reasons why we know that Jesus was dead. And I could continue if you want. I could talk a little bit more about the swoon theory, and if you want, or we can move on to something else.
Well, our time is really running out. Just really quickly, what many of the liberal theologians who It just kills me. They celebrate Easter and don't believe in a bodily resurrection. Hello? The symbolic theory that he really didn't rise from the grave. It was all symbolism to make the disciples feel good, and so that they could start this new religious movement. How do you respond to that? And we've got about a minute and a half, 2 minutes.
There really isn't a basis in Scripture for this. So we could use strictly Scripture when it comes to answering questions like this. And what we do is we just use what we call good hermeneutics, which is just a way of reading any kind of text so that you can really understand what the authors were trying to say. And when you read the Bible in the different passages concerning Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, N.T. Wright talks about how there's just no way that somebody could read this scripture in the original Hebrew and Greek and come away with the idea that this was somehow not an actual bodily, physical resurrection. And so really the liberal theologians are really trying to fit a square peg into a round hole here.
Yeah, very true. Jamie, I've already given your website, but how can our listeners find out more about Confident Contender and what you do?
Absolutely. So the webpage is obviously one of the best places, but I'm also very active on Facebook and YouTube. So if you go to Facebook or YouTube and just search for Confident Contender, you'll see me there, and I try to post something every day, and that's probably the best place to find me. ConfidentContender.com, or do a search on Facebook for Confident Contender Jamie Goodlet, Goodlet. Jamie, it's great to have you back on the program, and if we don't speak before then, have a happy Easter, a wonderful Resurrection Day, brother. Thanks, Bob. Thanks for having me.
It is my pleasure. My pleasure. Jamie Goodlet, ConfidentContender.com. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.